I'd been head of security at the Galactic Academy for 11 cycles when a human student's backpack started growling. Let me be clear about something. In 11 cycles, I'd seen contraband that would make your feeding tendrils curl. Unauthorized experiments prohibited. Substances, one memorable incident involving a student who'd somehow smuggled an entire hydroponic garden into the ventilation system. But predators, actual living apex level predators in the main entrance hall during morning registration. That was new. The scanner array lit up like a solar flare, 3 distinct signatures all registering as Crevathy predator cubs. For those of you who skipped xenobiology, Creathy are what happens when evolution decides to create the perfect killing machine and then gives it pack hunting intelligence. They're quadrupedal, covered in obsidian black fur that shift colors for camouflage and possess enough bite force to crack titanium alloy plating. Their claws secrete a paralytic compound. They hunt in coordinated groups using what we're 90% sure is low-level telepathy. Oh, and they're Category 5 restricted, which means possessing one without a Milidarira containment license carries a sentence of 20 cycles in a rehabilitation facility. 3 of them were currently in the Academy entrance hall inside someone's bag. My entire team converged on the scanner checkpoint within 30 seconds. Pix, my junior officer, had his weapon drawn and his idox fully extended in threat display. 6 other officers formed a perimeter. Standard Predator protocol dictates immediate area evacuation and specialized containment team deployment. The human standing at the scanner looked about as concerned as someone waiting for toast. She was tall by human standards with dark skin and her hair pulled back in what I've since learned is called a ponytail. She wore standard Academy registration clothing and carried a large canvas bag over one shoulder, the bag that was moving, the bag that was emitting low rumbling sounds that every instinct I possessed identified as dangerous predator vocalizations. She noticed our weapons pointed at her and smiled. Oh hey, she said, her tone suggesting mild greeting rather than abject terror. I know this looks weird, I can explain. Step away from the bag, I said, keeping my voice level. My weapon stayed trained on the moving canvas. Slowly, no sudden movements. The human whose registration badge identified her as Kira tilted her head. If I step away, they'll freak out. Just give me a second. She reached into the bag, every weapon in the hall charged up simultaneously. Pix made a sound I'd never heard him make before, something between a warning hiss and a prayer to the void. Kira pulled out a predator cub. It was small, maybe the size of my torso, with midnight fur that rippled with deeper shadows. Its eyes were molten gold, and when it yawned, I counted 3 rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. The claws on its 4 paws extended and retracted in a rhythm I recognized from predator behavior training as contentment needing. The cub looked at Kira's face and made a chirping sound. The human scratched it behind what I assume were its ears. This is Ash, she said like she was introducing a colleague. The other 2 are still in the bag. They're a bit shy around new people. My primary and secondary brains briefly stopped coordinating. I've reviewed the security footage since then. I stood there for a full 6 seconds with my mouth slightly open, looking like An idiot. That I finally managed is a crevathy. Predator. Yeah, Kira agreed. She shifted the cup to her other arm. It draped across her limbs like it was boneless, still making that bizarre chirping sound. I know. They're restricted. I have the temporary transport permits from the Interessees Wildlife Authority. They're in my registration packet. You're holding a crevathy predator, I repeated, because apparently my brain had decided repetition was the only safe response to reality breaking. I'm holding ash, she corrected. Ember and smoke are still in the bag. Do you want to see the permits, or should I just get them out so they stop squirming? Before I could formulate an answer that made sense, the bag erupted. 2 more cubs spilled onto the polished academy floor. They landed with the kind of grace that predators are born with, immediately taking defensive positions with their backs to Kira's legs. Their fur shifted from black to a mottled gray that matched the floor tiles. Both had their attention locked on my security team, and those golden eyes held the kind of calculating intelligence that makes you question whether you're the one doing the hunting. Pix took an involuntary step backward. His weapon hand was shaking. The cub's lips pulled back, revealing all those lovely teeth. Ash, ember, smoke, Kira said, her voice dropping into a tone that I can only describe as firm but not angry. Sit. The cub sat. All 3 of them simultaneously, haunches on the ground, tails curled around their front paws, eyes still locked on us, but bodies perfectly still. I've been in security for 19 cycles total. I've handled riots, containment breaches, and 1 incident involving a dimension-hopping student that I'm still not cleared to discuss. In all that time, I'd learned to trust my training and my instincts. Both were currently filing for early retirement. That's not possible, Pix whispered. He was right. Crevathy predators don't respond to verbal commands. They're intelligent, yes, but their cognitive structure doesn't process language in a way that allows for instruction. Following multiple xenobiology studies have confirmed this. You can't train them like you'd train a domestic animal, because their brains literally don't work that way. The 3 cubs sitting in perfect formation suggested that someone forgot to tell them about the studies. Kira seemed to notice our collective mental shutdown. She smiled again, gentler this time. Look, I know this is irregular. When I got accepted to the academy, I contacted the administration about the cubs. They were orphaned about 6 months ago, and I've been their primary caregiver since then. The Wildlife Authority confirmed they'd imprinted on me, so I was granted a special exception to bring them along until we can find a proper rehabilitation facility. Imprinted, I said. The word felt strain in my mouth. Yeah, it happens with Earth animals all the time. Baby birds, mammals, even some reptiles. If they bond with a caregiver early enough, they form an attachment that affects their entire behavioral development. These aren't Earth animals, obviously. Kira shifted the cub in her arms. Ash had apparently fallen asleep because his breathing had deepened and his claws had fully retracted. But the principle is the same. They lost their parent in a territorial dispute. I was volunteering at the Wildlife Authority Intake Center when they arrived. I was the first one to feed them and clears throat well. She gestured at the 3 predators who showed no indication of wanting to be anywhere except near her. Here we are. Director Colvin chose that moment to arrive. He's a Vthurian, which means he's about twice my height and has enough limbs to hold multiple drinks at parties. He took one look at the scene, his eye clusters cycling through what I've learned to recognize as rapid emotional processing, and made a sound like escaping hydraulics. Thixel, he said very carefully. Why are there creative predators in my academy? The human has permits, I heard myself say. Colvin's gaze fixed on Kira. You're the new xenolinguistics student? Yes, sir. She had the audacity to sound cheerful. Kira, it's an honor to be accepted to the academy. I'm really looking forward to the immersion programs with predators. They're cubs, she said like this. Clarified everything. They're completely harmless. The cub in her arms chose that moment to yawn, displaying those 3 rows of teeth again. The 2 on the floor remained in their sitting position, but their eyes tracked every movement my officers made with the kind of focus that suggested they were calculating attack vectors. Harmless was not the word I would have chosen. Colvin's limbs performed a gesture I recognized as deep frustration. The permits allow for transport and temporary housing. They say nothing about bringing them into academy facilities. The cubs can't be separated from me. Kira said. Her tone had shifted, becoming more serious. The imprinting bond is too strong. If they're forced into isolation, it causes severe psychological distress. The Wildlife Authority documentation explains all of this. Then you should have made alternative arrangements, Colvin said. The cubs sensed the tension. The 2 on the floor rose from their sitting position, moving to flank Kira more closely. Their fur darkened, and I noticed their claws extending slightly. Kira noticed too. Easy, she murmured. Down. They settled, not completely relaxed, but no longer in pre-attack posture. My security training had not prepared me for this. The emergency xenobiology team arrived within 20 minutes, led by Dr. Mirth, those who had enough credentials attached to his name that reading them aloud would exceed our lunch break. He brought portable containment units, sedative equipment, and the kind of confidence that comes from publishing 40 research papers on predator behavior. The cubs took one look at the containment units and growled in harmony. Let me tell you something about that sound. I've heard predator vocalizations in training simulations. I've reviewed attack footage for security assessments. But hearing 3 Creathy cubs harmonize their threat responses in person, that's the kind of sound that makes your genetic memory wake up and start screaming about ancient things with too many teeth. Those didn't even flinch. Fascinating, they're coordinating their vocal patterns to maximize intimidation effect. That's usually a behavior that takes cycles to develop. They're 6-month-old, Kira said. She'd moved to put herself between the cubs and Mirthos's team, which seemed like a terrible survival strategy until I remembered the cubs were on her side. Impossible. Mirthos pulled out a scanning device. Kvatha don't achieve coordinated pack behavior until at least 18 months of age. Their neural development doesn't support that level of social complexity. Earlier, one of the cubs, I think it was Ember, made a sound like a scoff. Mirthos stared at her. She stared back, then deliberately turned around and sat with her tail facing him. I watched a xenobiology expert with 4 decades of Experience get offended by a predator. We need to get them into containment for proper assessment, Mthos said, recovering his professional demeanor. The portable units are rated for Category 5 predators, standard protocol. They won't go, Kira said simply. They're animals, they don't get a choice, I saw. Kira's expression shift. Not angry. Exactly, but something harder. Underneath. They're intelligent beings who have been through trauma. They absolutely get a choice. Murthos made a gesture to his team. 3 specialists moved forward with the containment units, which looked like oversized transport crates with enough technological warnings stamped on them to make a weapons inspector nervous. The cubs moved, not attacking. That's what made it worse. They simply repositioned themselves into a defensive triangle around Kira, each one facing a different specialist. Their movements were fluid, practiced-like. They'd rehearsed this exact formation dozens of times. Coordinated spatial awareness, Murthos breathed. He was recording everything on his scanner. Pack hierarchy positioning. This is at least cycle 2, behavioral development. How is this possible? Because I trained them, Kira said. Entire hallway went quiet. You trained them, I repeated, because apparently I was still using repetition as a coping mechanism. Yes, basic commands, social behaviors, bite, inhibition, standard stuff. She noticed our expressions. What? Did you think I was just letting them do whatever they wanted? They're predators. They need structure. Murthos lowered his scanner. You're telling me you applied animal training techniques to create the predators? Dog training techniques specifically. That's my actual job back on Earth, Kira shrugged. I run a training facility for difficult cases, aggressive dogs, anxiety issues, behavioral problems. When the cubs came to me, I just used the same methods. They aren't dogs, Murthos said, his tone suggesting he was explaining this to someone who might have missed basic biology. Obviously, they're way smarter. Kira looked down at the 3 cubs who were still maintaining their defensive formation. But the principles are the same. Positive reinforcement, clear communication, consistent boundaries. Watch, she held up one hand, fingers spread. Ember, stay, the cub hooed. Insulted. Murthos earlier froze in position. Kira walked 15 paces away. The other 2 cubs watched but didn't move. She turned around. Ember, come. The cub bounded across the space and sat directly in front of Kira, looking up at her with what I can only describe as devotion. Good girl. Kira produced something from her pocket. A small dried piece of what my scanner identified as Earth origin meat product. The cub took it with surprising delicacy, considering the teeth situation. Murthos' scanner was screaming with data. She's responding to complex verbal command. She's demonstrating impulse control. She's accepting food rewards as positive reinforcement. He looked at Kira like she'd just announced she could breathe vacuum. This violates 12 established principles of Kvatha neurology. Maybe your principles are wrong, Kira suggested. I'd never seen a xenobiologist look personally attacked by a sentence before. It was educational. Director Colvin had been observing from a safe distance. He moved closer now, though I noticed he kept my security team between himself and the cubs. Regardless of training, we cannot have predators roaming freely in academy facilities. They need to be transferred To a proper containment facility. No, Kira said, just no, flat, final. Non-negotiable. Colvin's limbs performed a complex gesture that roughly translated to administrative frustration. Miss Kira, I understand you formed an attachment to these creatures, but this is a matter of safety. We have over 3,000 students in residence. The liability alone, they won't go into containment without me, Kira interrupted, and if you try to force them, people will get hurt. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Kira's voice stayed level there, imprinted on me. Separation causes extreme distress. Extreme distress in predators equals dangerous behavior. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm telling you what will happen. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the specialists moved slightly closer. With a containment unit, all three cubs tensed, the air filled with that harmonized growl again, deeper this time, and I saw the specialist's hands shake. Stand down, I ordered. My team stepped back. The cubs relaxed immediately. Murthos was muttering into his recording device. Threat assessment and de-escalation based on pack leader stress levels. Proportional response to perceived danger. This is extraordinary. This is a problem, Colvin corrected. We need a solution. The solution is letting them stay with me, Kira said. I have a single dormitory assignment. We can modify it for their needs. They're house-trained. They respond to commands, and they won't bother anyone if they're not bothered. First, house-trained, I said. My brain had apparently decided to focus on the least important detail. Yes, they use a designated area. They don't chew furniture, and they know not to jump on people. Kira paused. Well, Smoke still has some impulse control issues, but we're working on it. The cub I assumed was Smoke flicked his ears in what might have been embarrassment. Director Colvin made a sound like a deflating pressure seal. I need to consult with the Academy board. In the meantime, the predators cannot be left unsupervised. They're never unsupervised. Kira said, they're with me, and if you need to attend classes, they'll come with me. I watched Colvin's eye clusters cycle through what I'm certain were increasingly violent administrative fantasies. You cannot bring predators to xenolinguistics lectures. Why not? They're quieter than most students. This was going nowhere. I'd seen enough administrative standoffs to know when both sides had locked into position. Sir, perhaps a temporary compromise. We assigned security monitoring to Miss Kira's dormitory. The cubs remain with her, but under observation. Meanwhile, we verify the permits and consult with the Wildlife Authority. Colvin looked like he wanted to argue, but decades of administrative experience recognize a practical solution when it's offered. Fine, 48 hours. If we can't find an alternative by then, the predators go into professional containment regardless of the consequences. Kira opened her mouth to protest. That's non-negotiable, Colvin said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. 48 hours, Miss Kira. I suggest you use that time to develop a very convincing argument. He left, taking his limbs and his administrative authority with him. Murtho stayed. His scanner was still recording. I need to observe them for research purposes. No experiments, Kira said immediately. Just observation. I'll be non-intrusive. Murthos looked at the cubs with a kind of fascination usually reserved for discovering new laws of physics. If you've actually managed to train Cavathi predators using Earth animal techniques, the implications are staggering. This could revolutionize our entire understanding of cross-species behavioral psychology. They're not research subjects, Kira said, but her tone had softened slightly. They're cubs who lost their parent and need someone to look after them. They're impossibilities. Mirthos countered, and I need to understand how you made the impossible happen. Before Kira could respond, my communicator chimed. I checked the message and felt my scales try to retreat into my body. Problem, Kira asked. The Galactic Predator Institute has been notified of the situation. They're sending a specialist team. I looked at her, then at the three cubs, who were currently grooming each other, like they weren't the subject of a major security incident. They'll arrive in 6 hours. Is that bad? Pix answered before I could. The Predator Institute doesn't send teams for routine matters. They send teams when they think something is very wrong or very dangerous. The cubs aren't dangerous, Kira protested. Tell that to their Category 5 restriction classification, I said. These specialists have authority to override local protocols if they decide the cubs are a threat. They can order immediate termination. The word hung in the air like a weapon. Kira's expression went from confused to horrified to absolutely resolute in about 3 seconds. No, it may not be your choice, then I'll make it their choice. She looked down at the cubs who were watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. 6 hours, plenty of time to prove they're not a threat. How exactly do you plan to do that? I asked. Kira smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes security directors very nervous. I'm going to show them what these three can really do. The Galactic Predator Institute team arrived in 5 hours and 40 minutes, which meant they'd been traveling before we even called them. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they took this situation. There were 6 of them, all wearing the Institute's distinctive gray uniforms, with enough protective gear to survive a small war. Their leader was a Koran named Shira with 4 arms and an expression that suggested she'd seen every stupid thing the galaxy had to offer and was tired of all of it. She took one look at Kira sitting in the Academy's main courtyard with 3 Creathi cubs lounging around her like furniture and said, absolutely not. Nice to meet you too, Kira replied. She was scratching Ash behind the ears. The cub was making a rumbling sound that my scanner kept insisting was purring, which was biologically impossible for Cravathi. Shara turned to me. Security Chief Thex, your report said the predators were contained. They are contained, I said, gesturing at the scene. They haven't left a 20 m radius of Miss Kira since arrival. That's not containment, that's a disaster waiting for a trigger. They've been here for 8 hours. I pointed out. No incidents yet. Villara approached the group, stopping at a distance her training probably defined as safe. Her team fanned out behind her. Scanning equipment active. Miss Kira, I'm going to be direct. Create predators cannot be domesticated, trained, or kept as companion animals. The fact that they've imprinted on you doesn't change their fundamental nature. They're apex predators with Category 5 classification for good reason. Kira looked up. Have you ever actually spent time with Cavathi cubs? I've Studied them for 20 cycles. I've observed them in natural habitats, monitored them in sanctuaries, and participated in 3 separate behavioral research projects. So that's a no. I saw Velara's secondary arms twitch. Observation and study are the appropriate methods for dangerous predators. They're not dangerous. Kira stood up. The cubs immediately rose with her, forming that defensive triangle pattern. They're intelligent, social animals who respond to clear communication and consistent boundaries. Watch. She pulled out 3 small rubber objects from her bag, earth toys. My scanner identified them. She threw all 3 in different directions. The cubs exploded into motion, each one tracking a separate toy. They bounded across the courtyard with terrifying grace, snatched their targets and returned to Kira within seconds. All 3 dropped their toys at her feet and sat, tails wagging. Velara's team was frantically recording fetch behavior. One of them breathed. Cravathi don't fetch, they're hunting. Instinct doesn't include retrieval. Ash, Ember, and Smoke do, Kira said. She picked up the toys and threw them again. Same result. They also know sit, stay, come down. Leave it and drop it, we're working on. Roll over, but Ember thinks it's beneath her dignity. The cub in question made an offended chirping sound. This is anomalous behavior, Belshara said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Kavathi cognitive structure doesn't support this level of instruction. Following. Maybe you've been studying adult behaviors. Kira collected the toys again. Cubs are different. Their brains are still developing, which means they're more adaptable. On Earth, we've known for centuries that early socialization and training creates permanent behavioral changes in predators. Earth predators aren't creative. No, but the principle of neuroplasticity is universal. Kira gestured to Dr. Murthos, who'd been observing from the side. Your own xenobiologist has been documenting everything. Tell her. Murthos stepped forward, looking like someone who'd spent the last 8 hours having his world view systematically demolished. The cubs demonstrate behavioral patterns consistent with domestication theory. They respond to verbal commands. They show preference for human proximity. They exhibit bite inhibition and impulse control. Their neural scans show enhanced activity in the social bonding centers of their brains. Enhanced how Felchara demanded by approximately 40% compared to baseline. Cravathi cubs. Murthos pulled up data on his scanner. The regions responsible for reading emotional cues and responding to social feedback are significantly overdeveloped. It's as if their brains rewired themselves to better communicate with Miss Kira. Shara studied the data, her forearms moving in complex patterns that suggested intense thought. This shouldn't be possible, and yet Kira said. One of Shara's team members spoke up. Director, we should run the aggression protocols, standard assessment for any predator in proximity to civilian populations. I saw Kira tense. What does that involve? We simulate threat scenarios, Velara explained. See how the predators respond to stress, sudden movements, perceived danger. It's necessary to establish their safety profile. They'll respond defensively if they think I'm threatened. Kira said that's not aggression, that's protection. Semantics. If they attack during the assessment, they fail. Then don't make them think I'm being attacked. Shara's expression suggested this was the dumbest thing she'd heard all cycle. The entire point of the assessment is determining how they react to threatening situations. They react how I tell them to react. Kira looked down at the three cubs. We've worked on this: impulse control, threat assessment, proportional response. They won't attack unless I give them permission. You're claiming you have that level of control over apex predators. I'm saying they trust me enough to follow my lead even when their instincts say otherwise. That's what training is. Velshara and I made eye contact. I could see her running calculations, trying to determine if this was confidence or delusion. Fine, we'll conduct a modified assessment, but if any of those cubs show uncontrolled aggression, this conversation ends and they go into maximum security containment. Agreed. Kira hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. The next 20 minutes were some of the most stressful of my career, and I once had to negotiate with a student who'd accidentally created sentient furniture. Velara's team set up scenarios: sudden, loud noises, rapid movements near Kira, unfamiliar individuals approaching quickly. Each time the cubs tensed. Each time Kira gave a quiet command, and they settled. Their bodies vibrated with suppressed instinct, but they held position. Distance test, Velshara announced. We separate Miss Kira from the cubs. See how they respond. They won't like it. Kira warned. That's the point. Two team members guided Kira to the far side of the courtyard. The cubs immediately moved to follow, but Kira held up her hand. Stay. They stopped, all three locked eyes on her, their bodies rigid with tension. Ember ash smoke, Kira called across the distance. Down they laid down. Their claws were fully extended, scraping against the stone, and that harmonized growl started building in their throats, but they stayed down. Shara positioned herself between Kira and the cubs. Barrier test. Predators typically respond aggressively when separated from pack leaders by obstacles. Don't hurt her, Kira called out, her voice tight. We're just standing here. Velara raised one arm, blocking the cub's line of sight to Kira. Growling intensified. Ember started to rise. Ember, no, Kira said, her voice cutting through the tension. Stay down. It's okay. The cub froze halfway up, torn between instinct and instruction. For a long moment, I thought we were about to see exactly how fast a Creathe cub could cross 20 m. Then Ember laid back down, though her entire body shook with the effort of suppressing the urge to act. Velara lowered her arm. Remarkable. She's overriding pack protection. Instinct through vocal command alone. Can we stop torturing them now? Kira asked. One more test, Velshara gestured to her team. Threat simulation. We need to see if they can distinguish between actual danger and controlled scenarios. What kind of threat simulation? I asked, not liking where this was going. Standard protocol. One team member makes aggressive movements toward Miss Kira, while she commands the cubs to stand down. If they attack, they fail. If they hold position despite instinct, they pass. Kira went pale. You're going to pretend to attack me and expect them not to defend me? Yes, that's insane. That's the standard, Shara said. If these cubs are going to exist anywhere near civilian populations, they need to prove they won't attack every time someone moves too quickly or raises their voice. You claim you've trained Them prove it. The courtyard went quiet. Even Mthos had stopped recording. Kira looked at her cubs. They were still in the down position, but their eyes tracked every movement. They knew something was wrong. Predator instinct doesn't need language to understand. Thread. Okay, Kira said quietly, but I need to prepare them first. You have 2 minutes, Velshara allowed. Kira walked back to the cubs. They mobbed her immediately, pressing against her legs and making worried chirping sounds. She sat down on the ground with them, and for a moment they were just a young woman and 3 frightened animals who didn't understand why the world had suddenly become stressful. Listen, she said softly, scratching each cub in turn. Something's going to happen that's scary. Someone's going to act like they're hurting me, but they're not really. It's pretend, like when we practice at home. The cubs tilted their heads, those gold eyes fixed on her face. I need you to trust me. When I say stay, you stay. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, stay means stay. Can you do that for me? Ash made a low, uncertain sound. I know it's hard, but you're good cubs, and you can do hard things. She touched each of their heads. I trust you. Do you trust me? 3 tails wagged hesitantly. Kira stood up and walked back to the designated position. The cubs moved to follow, but she held up her hand. Stay. They sat trembling, but they sat. Velara nodded to one of her team members, a Valnian with impressive size and multiple limbs. He approached Kira with exaggerated aggressive posture, moving faster with each step. The cubs growling could probably be heard in the next district. The Velnian raised his arms in a threatening gesture. Ember and smoke started to rise. Ash's claws were fully extended, gouging marks into the stone beneath him. Stay, Kira said, her voice shaking but firm. Stay, it's okay, stay. The Valian grabbed Kira's shoulder, not hard, but the gesture clearly aggressive. All 3 cubs launched forward. Stop, Kira shouted, and the command cracked through the air like a weapon. The cubs froze mid-charge, literally midair, for Ember, who landed hard and skidded to a stop. 3M. From the Velnian, all 3 stood in attack posture, every line of their bodies screaming readiness to defend. But they didn't move forward. Down, Kira said, down now. Slowly, fighting every instinct, the 3 cubs laid down. They didn't take their eyes off the Velnian. The growling never stopped, but they were down. The Velnian released Kira's shoulder and stepped back, looking shaken. Velara was staring at her scanner like it had personally betrayed her. They stopped in mid-attack. They stopped on command. I told you, Kira said. She walked to her cubs and knelt down with them. They pressed against her, making distressed sounds. It's okay. You did so good. Such good cubs. It's over. Velara looked at me, then at Murthos, then back at the scene of a human comforting 3 apex predators who just demonstrated the impossible. I need to contact the Institute director, she said finally. This changes everything. The Institute director arrived by emergency transport 6 hours later, which apparently is what happens when you accidentally prove that everything the galaxy knows about predator behavior might be wrong. Director Vexathorn was old, even by Corin standards, with 6 arms instead of the usual 4 and enough credentials that introducing him took longer than most staff meetings. He settled into the academy's conference room like he owned it. positioned himself across from Kira and her 3 cubs and studied them in silence for a full 3 minutes. The cubs stared back unimpressed. "Miss Kira," Vexthorn finally said, "do you understand what you've done? Kept 3 orphan cubs alive," she offered. "You've domesticated an endangered apex species." The word domesticated hung in the air like an accusation. Kira shook her head. "I didn't domesticate them. Domestication takes generations of selective breeding. I just taught them manners. You taught prey predators to override their attack instinct on verbal command." Velshara interjected. She'd been standing against the wall, looking like she'd spent the last 6 hours questioning her entire career. "That's not manners, that's fundamental behavioral modification. It's the same thing I do with aggressive dogs," Kira insisted. "You establish trust, set clear boundaries, reward good behavior. The species doesn't matter if you understand the psychology." Vexthorn's 6 arms moved in a complex pattern. "I didn't have the xenology background to interpret. The legal implications alone are staggering. Crevassi are protected under the Predator Conservation Act. Any action that alters their natural behavior patterns requires authorization from the Interspecies Conservation Committee. Their natural behavior pattern was starving to death," Kira said, her voice sharp. "They were orphaned cubs. I saved their lives by changing what they are, by teaching them how to exist safely in a multi-species environment." Kira gestured at the cubs who were currently arranged around her chair like furry bodyguards. "Look at them, they're healthy, they're happy, they're not a danger to anyone. Isn't that better than being locked in a sanctuary their whole lives?" "That's not for you to decide," Vexthorn said. "Crevassi conservation status means every individual matters to the species' survival. These 3 represent approximately 0.002% of the known population. We can't allow unauthorized behavior modification." I watched Kira's expression shift from defensive to something harder. "So what's the alternative? You take them away, stick them in a facility somewhere, try to undo 6 months of bonding and training. That'll definitely be better for their psychological health." Mirthos cleared his throat. He'd been quiet until now, but I recognized the look of someone about to complicate everything with facts. "Director, if I may, the neural scans suggest the behavioral changes are likely permanent. The cub's brain structure has adapted to human social cues. Attempting to reverse that could cause severe psychological damage. Then they remain in controlled captivity," Vexthorn said. "Monitored, studied, but separated from civilian populations." "Without me," Kira said flatly. "Imprinting bond is unfortunate, but not a sufficient reason to," Ember growled. Just Ember, a low, sustained sound that made every person in the room remember that we were having a policy discussion. In Clear's throat, the presence of 3 apex predators. "Down," Kira said quietly, and Ember stopped, though her eyes stayed locked on Vexthorn. "You see," Vexthorn gestured at the cub. "Threat response to perceived challenge. Unpredictable. Dangerous." She responded to me sounding upset. Kira corrected, and she stopped when I told her to. "That's not unpredictable. That's exactly what I trained her to do." Director Colvin had been observing from the corner. He moved forward now, his multiple limbs suggesting he was about to make an Administrative decision. Perhaps there's a compromise. Miss Kira remains at the academy with the cubs under strict monitoring. They become part of a research program, studying cross-species behavioral training. We document everything, establish protocols, see if the methods can be replicated. Absolutely not, Vexthorn said. You want to turn your academy into an experimental predator facility. I want to understand how a human dog trainer accomplished what 20 cycles of predator research said was impossible. Colvin replied, if Miss Kira's methods work, the implications extend far beyond 3 cubs. How many species have we classified as untrainable because we didn't understand their psychology? That made everyone pause. Velara spoke up. Director Vexthorn, the assessment results were unprecedented. The cubs demonstrated impulse control, threat, discrimination, and social bonding far beyond anything in our literature. If we could understand the mechanism, apply it systematically, you're talking about fundamentally changing how we interact with predator species. Vexthorn interrupted. I'm talking about giving them better lives. Velara said, most predators in captivity are kept in isolation because they're considered too dangerous for social interaction. But if they can be trained, socialized, given meaningful enrichment, the welfare implications are enormous. Vexthorn's arms performed what I was learning to recognize as deep thought processing. And if the training fails, if other cubs don't respond the same way, if someone gets hurt trying to replicate this, then we study why. Murthos said, Miss Kira didn't wake up one day with magical predator control. She used specific techniques based on Earth's animal training history. That's replicable knowledge. Earth's history of domesticating wolves took thousands of years, Vexthorn pointed out, and we've had faster than light travel for 5 centuries. Culva countered, we can probably figure out accelerated predator socialization. I decided it was time for the security perspective. Director Vexthorn, I've had Miss Kira and the cubs under observation for 14 hours now. They've interacted with 47 different individuals, been exposed to multiple stressors, and passed every behavioral assessment the Institute could devise. At what point does evidence outweigh policy? Vexthorn looked at me like I'd betrayed him personally. You're advocating for this. I'm advocating for reality. I said the cubs exist. They're bonded to a human. Separating them causes distress to all parties and solves nothing. Keeping them together under controlled conditions gives us data and keeps everyone safe. Safe, Vexthorn repeated. 3 Creathe predators loose in an academy of students, and you call that safe? Safer than 3 traumatized predators in forced isolation who might escape and actually become dangerous. I pointed out. Kira had been quiet during this exchange, watching the adults argue over her cub's fate. Now she spoke, and her voice cut through the debate. I'm not letting you take them. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm not trying to be difficult, she continued. I understand you have procedures and policies and very good reasons for all of it, but these cubs, trust me, they've been through enough. I won't let them be locked up and studied like specimens when they're healthy and happy and not hurting anyone. You're a student, Vexthorn said. You don't have authority. I have 3 Cathy predators who won't leave my side, Kira interrupted. That seems like authority. It was possibly the worst negotiating strategy I'd ever witnessed, and also somehow effective. Vexthorn's arms cycled through several emotional states before settling on resignation. If we allow this, there will be conditions, extensive documentation, regular behavioral assessments, incident reporting protocols. The moment those cubs show uncontrolled aggression, they won't, Kira said, but if they do, they're immediately transferred to maximum security. Non-negotiable. Kira looked down at Ash, Ember, and Smoke. They looked back at her with those golden eyes, tails wagging slightly. They won't, she repeated. But I agree to your conditions. Culvin's limbs performed what might have been relief. I'll establish a new department, xenopsychology and cross-species behavioral studies. Miss Kira serves as primary researcher with Dr. Murthos as academic supervisor. I'm a student, Kira protested. I don't know how to run a research program. You trained 3 Kathy cubs, Murthos said. I think you can handle some paperwork. Over the next hour they worked out details. Kira's dormitory would be modified for the cubs. She'd document all training methods. Students from xenobiology, psychology, and behavioral sciences could observe with permission. The cubs would wear monitoring collars. Security protocols would be established for every possible scenario. I watched 3 apex predators nap through discussions about their future and reflected on how my career had gotten so weird. Finally, when everything was settled and the contracts were signed and the Institute team was preparing to leave, Vexes approached Kira one last time. Miss Kira, I hope you understand the responsibility you've taken on. Those cubs will grow. They'll become stronger, more independent, harder to control. Techniques that work now may not work in 3 cycles. Then I'll adapt. Kira said simply. That's what training is, continuous adjustment based on changing needs. And if you can't, then I'll ask for help, but I won't abandon them. Vexthorn studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Kira admitted. Most good trainers are. He left, shaking his head, which seemed appropriate. The conference room cleared out gradually until it was just me, Kira, and 3 predator cubs who'd accidentally created a new academic department. So, Kira said, looking exhausted, do you know where the student registration office is? I still need to sign up for classes. I stared at her. You just revolutionized predator behavioral science, and your concern is class registration. I'm here for a xenolinguistics degree. She said. The cubs are just additional dependents. Ash yawned, displaying those 3 rows of teeth. Ember was chewing on what appeared to be Smoke's tail. Smoke didn't seem to mind. Just try not to domesticate anything else while you're here, I said. Kira grinned. No promises. I escorted her to the administration building, watching her navigate academy bureaucracy with 3 Crevathy cubs trailing behind her like oversized puppies. Students stopped and stared. Faculty pressed themselves against walls. Security feeds would be entertaining for weeks. The registrar processed her class schedule without blinking, which suggested either remarkable composure or complete dissociation from reality. As Kira left with her course materials and her apex predators, I heard her telling the cubs they couldn't eat the dean's ornamental plants. Just another Day at the Galactic.